Let's just begin with the latest on the ground and what's happening in the Russian offensive.
Yes, I mean, the Donbass doesn't look as if it's changed very much, the battlefields here, but there's quite a lot going on as we're under the surface. We all talk about Bakhmut, which is in its 10th, almost 11th month now of agony, and we are now in the end game. A month ago, we thought we were in the end game, but in fact, the Ukrainians went back into Bakhmut, in effect. They decided to try to make it last a bit longer because they're playing for time. But what's actually happening, what's more interesting in a way, is that the Russians are moving some of their best forces around Crimea, which is really important to them, and they're moving them down towards Vuhledar and Avdiivka, which are a bigger issue. Now, Vuhledar in particular is strategically important to them. Avdiivka is a bit like Bakhmut. They're actually demolishing the place, and they're going to take control of the rubble eventually. But the reason I think the Russians are fighting so hard at Avdiivka, and they're moving some of the better troops down there, is they're trying to draw the Ukrainians away from Vuhledar, which is what they really want. And so although the battle is concentrated on Bakhmut, in terms of the world's media, what's really happening is going on at Avdiivka and Vuhledar down in the south. And ultimately, the Ukrainians are trying to hold as much territory as possible to play for time until their offensive can get going, which will be when the weather turns and when the ground is hard enough for the armour that they've accumulated over this period of the winter.
Now, on to the issue of landmines, Michael. On one of my trips to Ukraine last year, I was taken to an area that was completely contaminated with landmines after Russian troops left, and it was painstaking trying to clear those areas that represent such a threat to civilians. What's the latest on that situation with trying to demine those areas?
Yes, I mean, the Ukrainian government have said in the last 24 hours that Kharkiv, the whole Kharkiv Oblast, the area in yellow there, which the Ukrainians liberated in the autumn, that whole area is peppered with Russian landmines, these anti-personnel landmines. And the point is, when a force is retreating the way the Russians did, they leave mines in the way to slow down the troops that are chasing them, in effect, that are pursuing them. And the main landmine in Kharkiv, which is causing all the trouble, is the butterfly landmine. It's an anti-personnel landmine. It's known as the butterfly. The Russians developed it in the 1980s. It's very small. As you can see there, it's about as big as your hand. It carries about a 4-gram charge, very small charge, which is liquid explosive in the wings of the thing. And if you pick it up, it'll go off in your hand. It needs a tiny amount of pressure to set it off. It's not planted by anybody. It's fired from an artillery shell, or it's dropped by helicopters and aircraft. So they scatter thousands of them in one go, and they sit on the ground, and they're camouflaged in grass, and they're just there. And they cause immense harm, not much to the military. The military can just go through these things in their armoured vehicles, and if the military need to clear a field, they clear 20% of it, and that takes them through. But civilians, you can't go into a field, even if it's 90% clear, because if there's only 10 mines left out of 100, you still wouldn't go into the field. So these things have the effect of preventing any agriculture going on, quite apart from anything else. And it's a big problem in the world. There are estimated to be about 110 million mines in the world, still laid, still live. Every year, about 5,000 people are killed or injured by them, somewhere in the world. About half of those people are children. And children are really at risk of these sorts of things because they're everywhere and very quickly you can't really see them. And there are great organisations like the Halo Trust who lift these things, and they're lifting about 100,000 a year. But every year, about 2 million mines are sown somewhere in the world. So it's a huge problem, and the Russians aren't helping.
And just briefly, before I let you go, Michael, the latest on these classified documents that were released last week, highly sensitive documents. The US is really stepping up its efforts to try and find the source of this leak. Yeah. What's the latest on that, and how could it potentially impact the conflict? Yeah,
well, good luck in finding the source. I mean, almost certainly it was somebody, or maybe a couple of people, who were downloading documents, photographing them, and then putting them onto this gaming website, the Discord website, where they were sitting there for days before anybody noticed that they were important. So it has the look of a sort of an informed amateur about it. I don't think it was a...
Who are we talking? Some computer nerd?
We're talking about a nerd, but working inside the system. And the point is that the reason that the Americans are vulnerable to this sort of thing is that their secret and top secret material is shared among so many people. Thousands of people have access to this stuff. Wow. So that's how the Snowden revelations in 2015, 2016 did so much damage, because it comes out with people. I mean, he was only a contractor. He didn't even work for the Pentagon officially. He was just a contractor. But he had access to all this stuff.
Wow. And so it calls into question the security of
Absolutely.
their
And it's
system.
very embarrassing for the Americans. It doesn't make a lot of difference to what's going on in Ukraine, to be honest, but it's embarrassing for them in terms of their relation with Egypt, with Iran, over Korea, and with some of the European allies, because some of the stuff that's come out on those issues is genuinely something that was not known before. What's come out on Ukraine is only really a confirmation of what we knew already.